You are probably already familiar with the iconic image of American paratroopers jumping into Normandy on D-Day, but chances are you have never considered what happened in those first few seconds after their boots hit the ground. And this is understandable. The dramatic photographs and heroic narratives focus on courage and sacrifice, not on the mundane question of how a soldier gets his weapon ready to fire. Yet that mundane question determined who lived and who died in the darkness of occupied France. The answer came from the last place anyone expected, a company that had spent 20 years making steering wheels for automobiles. The M1A1 carbine was a folding stock variant of the standard M1 carbine, designed specifically for paratroopers who needed a weapon ready to fire within seconds of landing. At roughly 5.5 pounds and approximately 25 inches when folded, it could be carried tight against the body during a parachute jump and deployed almost instantly upon touching down. It was not the most powerful weapon American industry could produce. It did not match the range or stopping power of the M1 Garand that regular infantry carried. But the M1A1 solved a problem that was likely killing American soldiers faster than enemy bullets: the deadly gap between landing and firing. To understand why this weapon mattered, and why it probably saved thousands of lives, we need to go back to a training base in Georgia where instructors first recognized a problem that had no elegant solution. Let's follow beyond history, where historical stories are told from a different perspective, slower and deeper, to answer and listen to questions in the flow of history. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Your support is a great source of motivation to help us bring everyone better quality products. In March of 1942, at Fort Benning, Georgia, the United States Army was building airborne divisions at a pace that outstripped its ability to properly arm them. The concept seemed straightforward enough. Drop soldiers behind enemy lines by parachute, seize key objectives, create chaos in the enemy's rear areas. German forces had demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of this approach in Belgium and Crete. American military planners were determined to build their own airborne capability, but there was a fundamental problem that no amount of tactical brilliance could solve. Each paratrooper carried somewhere around 40 kilograms of equipment when he jumped: main parachute and reserve parachute, ammunition and grenades, rations and medical supplies, entrenching tools and specialized demolition equipment. The weight alone pushed men to the limits of what they could physically manage while falling through the sky. And somewhere in that chaos of straps and canvas, each man also had to carry a weapon. The standard infantry rifle was the M1 Garand, a magnificent piece of engineering that General Patton would later call the greatest battle implement ever devised. For standard infantry operations, he was probably right. The Garand weighed approximately 9.5 pounds, measured about 43 inches in length, and fired the powerful .3006 Springfield cartridge with devastating accuracy at ranges up to 500 yards. For paratroopers, however, the Garand presented serious difficulties. The rifle's length made it nearly impossible to carry safely during a jump. It caught on equipment, tangled in parachute risers, and threw off a man's balance during the critical moment of aircraft exit. The Army's solution was something called the Griswold bag, a heavy canvas sack that held the rifle disassembled into 3 main components. The theory seemed sound. A paratrooper would land, open the bag, assemble his rifle, and be ready to fight. Training manuals suggested this process might take perhaps 30 to 40 seconds under controlled conditions. The problem was that combat conditions were never controlled. Survivors from early training exercises would later describe the experience of fumbling with canvas straps and rifle components in darkness, listening to simulated enemy forces closing in. One can imagine what those soldiers must have felt, knowing that in actual combat, those closing footsteps would belong to German soldiers who would not wait for them to finish assembling their weapons. The Army needed something better. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions were already training for operations that everyone knew were coming. Every week without a solution was another week that paratroopers might jump into combat essentially unarmed for those critical first seconds after landing. The M1 carbine, introduced in 1941, seemed, at first glance, to offer a partial answer to the deadly problem airborne instructors had identified. It was, in many ways, exactly what the Army had been searching for. At roughly 5 pounds and just over 35 inches in length, it was dramatically lighter and more compact than the bulky M1 Garand. For a paratrooper who had to jump, fall, roll, and fight in less than 10 seconds, every ounce mattered. And while it was small, the carbine wasn't weak. It fired the .30 carbine cartridge, which propelled a 110-grain bullet at nearly 1,990 feet per second, fast enough to punch through German field jackets, webbing, and even light cover. It was significantly more powerful and more accurate than the .45 ACP round fired by the Thompson submachine gun, which lost velocity quickly and dropped like a stone past 50 yards. The M1 carbine, by contrast, stayed flat and true at the practical distances American paratroopers expected to face behind enemy lines. Its effective range of roughly 300 yards might seem modest when compared to the Garand's impressive reach, but that statistic misses the point entirely. Paratroopers weren't expected to fight at long range. Their battles would be sudden, violent, and close, inside hedgerows, farmhouses, narrow lanes, and dark fields where visibility was measured in tens of yards, not hundreds. In such a chaotic environment, the carbine's light weight, low recoil, and fast handling were far more valuable than long-range power. American industry agreed. Production scaled up with astonishing speed. By the end of the war, more than 6 million M1 carbines rolled off assembly lines, more than any other American small arm of World War II. It was a triumph of engineering, logistics, and mass production. And yet, even at 35 inches, the standard M1 carbine was still too long for safe parachute operations. In training jumps, instructors saw the same problem again and again. A paratrooper stepping out of a CIS-47 had to contend with a hurricane blast of wind, the violent tumble of freefall, and the bone-jarring snap when the parachute deployed. A long or awkward weapon caught straps, twisted against the body, or swung dangerously in mid-air. More than one recruit had cracked a rib when a full-length rifle slammed into him during chute opening. The frontline units knew the truth long before the reports reached Washington. A paratrooper didn't need a weapon he could fire. He needed a weapon he could fire immediately. Not in 30 seconds, not in 20 seconds, not after unstrapping a long case or assembling loose parts in the dark. Immediately. And so, in early 1942, Army Ordnance issued a simple but urgent request. Develop a carbine variant with a folding or collapsible stock, something compact enough to strap tightly against the chest during a jump, yet strong enough to unfold and lock instantly upon landing. 3 companies answered the call. 2 failed. The 3rd succeeded, and no one could have predicted who it would be. Its engineers did not come from America's great firearms houses. They had no legacy in military innovation. For decades, their factory floor had turned out only one kind of product: steering wheels. Yet in the spring of 1942, this small, unassuming company was about to deliver one of the most important weapons of the airborne war. Inland Manufacturing Division of General Motors had spent 2 decades making wood-wrapped steering wheels for automobiles in their Dayton, Ohio facility. They had become one of the largest producers of the standard M1 carbine by 1942, but their background was in automotive parts, not weapons design. This proved to be their greatest advantage. Traditional gunsmiths thought in terms of precision tolerances and hand-fitted components. Inland's engineers thought in terms of mass production, field reliability, and what might be called abuse tolerance. They designed for the 10,000th unit coming off an assembly line, not the first prototype in a laboratory. They designed for average users under stress, not expert marksmen in controlled conditions. Inland submitted their first drawings in March 1942. After Army review and revisions, the design was recommended for standardization on April 29, 1942, and officially approved on May 12, 1942. The design was elegant in its simplicity. Inland kept the proven action of the M1 carbine unchanged, replacing only the wooden stock with a wire butt stock that folded to the left side of the weapon. A wooden pistol grip provided the hand surface. When extended, the M1A1 measured approximately 35 inches, nearly identical to the standard carbine. When folded, it measured roughly 25 to 26 inches. The weight remained around 5.5 pounds, light enough for any paratrooper to carry without additional burden. But the most important innovation was what the design did not include. There was no locking mechanism. Some Army engineers apparently worried about this. Surely a stock needed to lock in position. Inland's designers understood something their critics may have missed. A lock meant additional moving parts. Moving parts meant potential failure points. Locks meant latches or buttons that a soldier would need to manipulate. Precious seconds lost fumbling with mechanisms while under fire. Instead, the M1A1 used a simple spring-loaded cam to hold the stock in either position. Push the stock left, and it folded against the receiver. Push it right, and it snapped into firing position. The spring tension alone held it securely during use. A paratrooper could probably snap that stock open with one hand, in complete darkness, without conscious thought. No buttons, no levers, just push until it clicked, and the weapon would be ready. The design assumed soldiers would be exhausted, scattered, possibly injured, certainly frightened. It assumed the worst possible conditions. And it likely worked anyway. Inland did not manufacture every component themselves. The folding stock carbine that would become the M1A1 was not the product of a single factory, but the result of a uniquely American network of wartime cooperation, a web of companies, skills, and improvisations that showed just how flexible the nation's industrial base could become when pushed by necessity. The S.E. Overton Company of South Haven, Michigan, known before the war for crafting high-quality wooden furniture, shifted seamlessly into weapons production, applying the same precision joinery they once used on cabinets and chairs to the wooden components of the carbine. They understood grain direction, stress points, weight distribution. What had once been living room craftsmanship was now battlefield reliability. Royal Typewriter Incorporated in Hartford, Connecticut, another company with no pre-war connection to rifles, was chosen to produce the wire buttstock assemblies. Their experience building the intricate internal frames of typewriters made them surprisingly well suited to fabricating the folding metal structures the airborne troops needed. For decades, their machines had been used for words. Now their metalwork would help decide lives. But wartime production rarely followed the path drawn on paper. By mid-1942, Royal Typewriter encountered production difficulties. Exactly what kind? No one outside ordnance ever recorded. Maybe it was scaling challenges. Maybe material shortages. Maybe durability issues in early prototypes. Whatever the reason, the program could not slow down. Airborne training was accelerating. The Army needed the folding carbine now, not next year. And so Overton, the furniture maker from Michigan, quietly stepped in to assume assembly responsibilities. No congressional hearing, no dramatic announcement, just one company seeing another struggle and filling the gap without complaint. This unglamorous pivot said something profound about American wartime industry. When one supplier faltered, another adapted. The mission came first. Always. Meanwhile, at Inland's massive Dayton facility, the same plant that had once produced automobile parts, the final assembly process ran with the clean, mechanical rhythm of mass production. Standard M1 carbine actions rolled off the line in long, gleaming rows. They were not altered, shortened, or redesigned. Instead, each was simply fitted into a specialized M1A1 folding stock in place of the traditional wooden one. The action remained identical. The operating mechanism remained identical. Only the stock changed. This was not just efficient, it was brilliant. Armorers already trained on the M1 carbine could service the M1A1 with no additional instruction. Spare parts remained fully interchangeable, ammunition supply chains required no change, and if a folding stock broke during combat, a soldier in theory could walk into a field workshop and walk out minutes later with a standard wooden stock, weapon restored, no questions asked. The deeper you look, the more that Inland's automotive heritage reveals itself in the design. The rivets that held the stock together were not exotic military components, they were standard automotive brake shoe rivets, chosen because their stress tolerances were already well understood. The leather cheek rest used methods borrowed straight from automobile upholstery production. Every piece was selected because it could be mass-produced, mass-replaced, and field-repaired by ordinary hands under extraordinary pressure. By October 1942, deliveries began flowing to the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions at Fort Benning. Young paratroopers, men barely out of high school, held the folding stock carbine in their hands for the first time, snapping the wire frame open with a metallic click that sounded like a promise. By October 1943, the first production run was complete. Roughly 71,000 weapons, each one a small engineering answer to a deadly tactical problem. And soon, these weapons would make their way across the Atlantic, into England, into night training drop zones, and finally into the black skies over Normandy, where the first men to land would need a gun that could fire in seconds. Or not at all. The M1A1 arrived with a specialized accessory called the jump scabbard, a padded canvas holster designed specifically to hold the folded carbine against a paratrooper's leg during a jump. In theory, it was an elegant solution. The scabbard fit snugly around the thigh, and a secondary strap at the bottom could be looped around the ankle to keep the weapon stable during freefall and the violent seconds of parachute deployment. But theory and reality rarely matched in airborne operations. The problem was simple physics. A paratrooper jumped from a C-47 carrying 60 to 80 pounds of equipment: helmet, boots, reserve chute, main chute, ammunition, grenades, knife, rations, radio gear, or demolition tools depending on the mission. Add body weight and descent rate, and the moment the parachute snapped open, the sudden deceleration sent enormous force traveling through every strap and attachment point. Now imagine a 5.5-pound steel and wood weapon strapped directly to the ankle. Reports from Fort Benning and later from North Africa made the issue clear. Upon landing, the downward momentum of the carbine tended to pull the strap tight at the exact instant the paratrooper's foot absorbed impact. In the worst cases, the force concentrated into a single narrow band of canvas could wrench an ankle severely, or even fracture the lower leg, before the soldier ever reached the ground. Officers noticed, medics noticed, the paratroopers most of all noticed, and paratroopers, being practical men, did what soldiers had always done in wartime. They adapted faster than the paperwork could. Many troopers, especially veterans of the 82nd's early jumps, simply abandoned the ankle strap. Some pushed the entire scabbard high on the thigh to reduce leverage. Others gave up on the jump scabbard entirely. The most common field solution, confirmed in training photographs and after-action accounts, was to tuck the folded M1A1 behind the reserve parachute pack, letting the existing shoulder and chest straps hold it firmly in place. Others slung it diagonally across the chest or back, accepting the minor inconvenience in exchange for safer landings. Rivalries even formed within battalions about which method worked best. The Army never officially approved these improvised solutions. It never banned them either. Airborne commanders understood better than anyone that combat had its own logic. If a minor equipment modification kept a man from starting a battle with a broken leg, no one was going to stop him. The priority was simple: hit the ground uninjured and ready to fight. Despite the issues with the scabbard, one thing never changed: the weapon itself performed. During stateside training, the spring-loaded cam locking the wire stock in place held firmly through the violent shock of parachute opening. The hinge mechanism did not deform under strain. The M1A1 opened cleanly, one solid pull, one audible click. Weapons fired reliably immediately after landing, even after being dragged through dust, grass, or mud. By the time training cycles ended at Fort Benning, the ordnance officers and airborne instructors agreed. Mechanically, the M1A1 worked exactly as intended. But training was controlled, predictable, safe. Sicily would be different. There, in the first large-scale airborne invasion in American history, launched in the darkness of July 1943, the M1A1 would experience real combat conditions for the first time. Unfamiliar drop zones, heavy equipment loads, strong Mediterranean winds, chaotic night navigation, scattered units, and enemy fire erupting from both land and sea. The folding carbine would no longer be evaluated in classrooms, on gentle Georgia soil, or on neat training fields marked with white chalk lines. Its true test would come in the violent, unpredictable reality of a night airborne assault. And the men carrying it would soon discover whether this compact little rifle could fulfill the promise it had been built for, arming a paratrooper within seconds of hitting the ground, or not at all. In July 1943, the M1A1 carbine entered combat for the first time during the Allied invasion of Sicily. The mission was Operation Husky, the first major airborne assault in American history, and nothing about it went according to plan. That night, as C-47 transports crossed the Sicilian coastline, American paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division stepped out into winds far stronger than forecast. What was supposed to be a coordinated, concentrated drop became a chaotic scattering of stick after stick across miles of rugged countryside. Men landed in vineyards, olive groves, dry riverbeds, stone-walled fields, and even on the edges of small coastal towns. Very few touched down anywhere near their assigned drop zones. It was exactly the nightmare scenario Army Ordnance had feared 15 months earlier when they asked for a folding stock carbine, isolated paratroopers, alone in unfamiliar terrain, with enemy forces all around them, needing a weapon immediately. And in that darkness, far from officers, far from supply bundles, far from the comforting structure of a division, the M1A1 carbine performed. Paratroopers who jumped with the folding stock variant did not waste time feeling blindly for weapons bags or trying to assemble full-length rifles. They didn't have to cut open containers, search the ground, or pray they landed near their equipment. Instead, they hit the ground, shrugged free of their chutes, snapped the stock open with one motion, chambered around, and prepared to fight. In the accounts that survived, the details are consistent. The spring-loaded locking cam held through the violent shock of parachute deployment. The wire stock remained rigid under both rapid fire and single shots. The recoil did not force the stock to collapse or shift. The mechanism fed, fired, and ejected properly even after being dragged through dirt or slammed against the ground during landing. Inland's engineers had promised that the M1A1 would function in conditions far harsher than any testing field in Ohio. Sicily proved them right, but the weapon did more than fire. It shrank the deadly time gap between landing and readiness. Most paratroopers were scattered across the Sicilian countryside in small groups of 2, 3, or 5, sometimes entirely alone. Many encountered Italian patrols or German outposts within minutes. In those moments, being able to raise a weapon immediately wasn't a technical advantage. It was the difference between ambushing and being ambushed. Some men later recalled that the M1A1 was the only reason they survived the first hour on Sicilian soil. And yet, for all its success, Sicily was only a partial test, a dress rehearsal for what airborne warfare would really look like in Europe. The drop zones were scattered, but the scale was limited. German defences in Sicily were uneven. Many engagements were small, chaotic skirmishes rather than sustained battles. The true crucible, the operation that would define airborne doctrine for decades, was still almost a year away. Normandy lay 11 months over the horizon. The M1A1 carbine had proven itself in the Mediterranean night, but the black skies over France on June 6, 1944, would present something else entirely. The largest airborne assault in history, carried out under fire against a fortified coastline with thousands of lives depending on seconds. And the little folding stock rifle would be there. June 6, 1944. In the cold hours after midnight, the sky over the Cotentin Peninsula roared with engines. Approximately 13,100 American paratroopers, men of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, jumped into a darkness broken only by tracer fire, burning farmhouses, and the distant flicker of explosions rolling inland from Utah Beach. The numbers alone conveyed the scale. 6,900 men from the 101st Airborne, 6,400 men from the 82nd Airborne, carried by 369 aircraft in Operation Boston. Each trooper loaded down with 60 to 80 pounds of gear: parachutes, radios, grenades, demo charges, ammunition, rations, knives, and personal weapons. But even before the first man left a plane, the invasion was unraveling. The scattering begins crossing the French coastline. The transport aircraft encountered the worst possible combination. Thick cloud cover, low visibility, unpredictable winds, and German anti-aircraft batteries fully alert. Pilots climbed sharply or dove without warning to avoid collisions, breaking formation with the units they carried. Others veered off course entirely as searchlights stabbed upward and flak bursts hammered the night. The carefully drawn drop zone maps, studied endlessly at English airfields, became irrelevant the moment the clouds swallowed the aircraft. Paratroopers found themselves stepping into blackness above terrain they could neither see nor recognize. Many never even glimpsed the ground before hitting it. The scattering was not merely unfortunate, it was catastrophic. Instead of cohesive companies landing together, sticks crashed into the countryside in fragments. A platoon sergeant landed alone in a flooded field. A mortar team came down miles from its intended DZ without its mortar. Pathfinder beacons meant to guide the incoming waves fell into German-held areas or were lost in marshland. Essential equipment simply vanished. The violent shock of parachute opening tore weapons bags loose. Griswold containers holding M1 Garand splashed into ponds or sank into marshes. Ammunition pouches, grenades, and demolition kits ripped free from web gear and disappeared forever in the darkness. Some paratroopers, hitting the ground unarmed, reportedly ran through enemy territory, searching for whatever weapons they could find, knowing German patrols were already converging on the noise of the air armada overhead. For those carrying the M1A1, the story was different. The paratroopers who had secured the M1A1 carbine behind their reserve parachutes, or strapped it directly to their harness, had a clear advantage the moment their boots struck Norman soil. There was no desperate fumbling for a weapons bundle, no frantic search for a lost rifle case, no assembly of components under enemy fire. They hit the ground. They freed themselves from their chutes. They snapped the stock open. They loaded a 15-round magazine. They were armed. It took seconds, not minutes. And in the hedgerow country of Normandy, seconds often meant survival. Normandy's bocage, a battlefield made for the M1A1. Few American soldiers had ever encountered terrain like the bocage, those ancient, centuries-old hedgerows that divided Normandy into thousands of small enclosed fields. Each field was bordered by high earthen banks, topped by dense vegetation, and often intertwined with thick roots and trees. Visibility was measured in yards, not hundreds of yards. It was terrain built for ambush. In this environment, the M1A1's traits became unexpectedly ideal. Lightweight, essential for climbing over hedgerows or crawling beneath vegetation. Fast handling, perfect for snapshot engagements at 10 to 40 yards. Low recoil, enabling quick follow-up shots. 15-round magazines, offering better sustained fire than the standard 8-round Garand clips. Survivor accounts, collected in post-war interviews, memoirs, and unit histories, repeatedly emphasize the same theme. Mobility meant life. A trooper who could move fast, react quickly, and shoot immediately had the edge in the Bocage labyrinth. Several veterans recalled that the M1A1 felt like an extension of their body, always ready, always within reach, especially during those chaotic first hours when officers were missing, units were scattered, and every hedgerow crossing felt like stepping into an unseen ambush. The human cost. The price of the Normandy airborne operation was brutal. American paratroopers suffered approximately 2,499 casualties in the opening phase of the invasion. In the 82nd Airborne alone, 15 of 16 battalion commanders were killed or wounded. Yet as heavy as the losses were, many historians agree they could have been far worse. The scattering, the lost equipment bundles, and the chaos in the drop zones were the kind of problems that, in a lesser prepared force, could have produced a disaster. But the men of the 82nd and 101st adapted, improvised, and fought with whatever they had. And for those who jumped with an M1A1 in their harness, whatever they had was more than enough. In the years after the war, many surviving paratroopers spoke of the folding stock carbine with something approaching gratitude. Not because it was perfect, not because it was the most powerful rifle on the battlefield, but because on that black June night, over enemy territory, it was ready. And readiness, in the airborne war, was everything. The M1A1 appeared in every subsequent American airborne operation of the war. Once the 82nd and 101st Airborne had validated the weapon in Sicily and Normandy, there was no question about its place in the kit of American paratroopers. It had proven its value in the one moment that defined airborne warfare, the seconds after landing, and so it became a constant companion in the months ahead. Market Garden, September 1944. In September 1944, the M1A1 jumped again, this time into the flat fields and canal networks of the Netherlands during Operation Market Garden. It was one of the most ambitious airborne offensives ever attempted. 3 airborne divisions from 3 nations, American, British, and Polish, were dropped over a series of Dutch towns in a bold effort to seize bridges across the Maas, Waal, and Rhine. The strategy called for speed, precision, and a bit of luck. It received none of those things. Allied intelligence had missed the presence of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, refitting near Arnhem. The narrow single road linking the drop zones to the Rhine bridges turned into a lethal bottleneck. Units found themselves pinned down in isolated pockets, fighting against tanks they weren't supposed to encounter. But even when the plan collapsed, the M1A1 did not. When American paratroopers of the 82nd hit the ground around Nijmegen, they did so with their weapons already in their hands, stock extended, magazines loaded, no assembly required. They moved quickly to seize key terrain, set up blocking positions, and reinforce hard-pressed British units. Outnumbered and outgunned, they still fought effectively. The failure at Market Garden was a failure of planning, a failure of intelligence, a failure of assumptions. It was never a failure of equipment. A practical limitation emerges. But extended operations revealed a limitation that no amount of testing at Fort Benning could have predicted. The folding wire stock, so effective for parachute jumps and close-range engagements, was not suited for launching rifle grenades. The solid wooden stock of the M1 Garand could absorb the violent recoil produced when firing a grenade adapter. The M1A1's lightweight folding structure, by contrast, risked bending, deforming, or even breaking under such force. Army regulations quietly acknowledged this reality. Do not launch rifle grenades from the M1A1 except in emergencies. This was not a flaw in the weapon. It was the result of a deliberate engineering trade-off. Inland's designers could have reinforced the stock, thickened the hinge, or replaced the wireframe with heavier steel, but doing so would have compromised the very qualities the weapon was built for: lightweight, compactness, speed of deployment, ease of mass production. The M1A1 was never meant to be a general-purpose infantry rifle. It was designed for the first 10 minutes of an airborne operation, when a paratrooper was most vulnerable, and for that mission, the trade-off was correct. Operation Varsity, March 1945. The M1A1 took to the skies one final time in March 1945 during Operation Varsity, the last major airborne operation of the European War. This mission carried American paratroopers across the Rhine and into the heart of Germany itself. Compared to earlier drops, Varsity was more tightly planned and better supported. Drop zones were closer together. Pathfinders marked the ground effectively. Anti-aircraft defenses, while fierce, were less disorienting than in Normandy. And once again, the M1A1 performed exactly as it had since Sicily. The weapon required no major modifications across 3 years of frontline use, no redesigns, no reinforcements, no emergency overhauls. The folding stock did not loosen. The hinge did not fail. The mechanism did not degrade in the mud, cold, or dust of Europe. By war's end, the Army had amassed enough data to make a simple statement. The original design simply worked. The M1A1 carbine had been created to solve one specific problem. In every operation, from Sicily to Normandy, from Nijmegen to the Rhine, it solved it. And for thousands of American paratroopers who landed behind enemy lines in the darkest hours of the war, that reliability may well have made the difference between walking off the battlefield or never getting the chance to fire a shot at all. Between October 1942 and December 1944, Inland Manufacturing produced approximately 140,591 M1A1 carbines in 2 distinct production runs. The first run delivered about 71,000 weapons, the guns that would arm the 82nd and 101st for Sicily and Normandy. The second run, completed as the war intensified, added another 69,000 carbines to the Army's airborne arsenals. What made the M1A1 unusual was not its design, or even its rapid timeline. It was the fact that every single M1A1 ever made came from one company, Inland Manufacturing of Dayton, Ohio. This stood in stark contrast to virtually every other American small arm of World War II, the M1 Garand, produced by 4 major contractors. The standard M1 carbine, produced by 10 different companies. The Thompson submachine gun, split between Auto Ordnance and Savage. The 1911 pistol, built by Colt, Remington, Ithaca, Union Switch and Signal, and others. In wartime America, distributing production across multiple factories was the norm, partly to increase volume, partly to protect supply in case of sabotage or bombing. But the M1A1 was different. It had to be an inland exclusive weapon. Why only inland? Because the clock was already ticking. When Army Ordnance approved Inland's folding stock carbine design in May 1942, they needed results immediately. Airborne operations were expanding. Training schedules were accelerating. The first major jumps, North Africa and Sicily, were already on the calendar. There was simply no time to create new supply chains or bring other factories online. The specialized production network that fed inland, the wooden stock work by S.E. Overton, the wire assemblies originally produced by Royal Typewriter, the automotive-grade rivets and fixtures sourced through Inland's parent automotive suppliers, was already running. To replicate that system elsewhere would have taken precious months the Army did not have, so Inland carried the entire load. The advantages of a single source. What could have been a liability became, in practice, a significant strength: uniformity. Every M1A1 that reached an airborne armourer's bench was identical. Every hinge, cam, rivet, and cheek rest fit exactly as Inland designed. Interchangeability. Spare stocks, barrels, bolts, or trigger groups swapped effortlessly. There were no contractor-to-contractor variations, no tolerance drift, no compatibility surprises. Predictability in the field. Armourers knew Inland's machining standards. They knew how the folding stock wore over time. They knew where failures might appear and how to fix them. For a weapon intended to operate in the most chaotic and unforgiving conditions in the European war, this uniformity mattered. The timeline, a masterclass in wartime production. The timeline still astonishes historians today. May 1942. Folding stock concept approved. August 1942. Inland files the patent application. October 1942. First M1A1 carbines shipped to Fort Benning, barely 4 months after the idea was greenlit. July 1943. Sicily validates the design in combat. June 1944. Normandy confirms its value under the harshest airborne conditions in history. That means 12 months from concept to combat-ready weapon, 20 months from the first sketches to the hedgerows of Normandy. This was wartime production at its most urgent, most focused, and most effective. The patent that arrived after the war. Inland's folding stock patent, filed in August 1942, was finally granted in August 1946, almost exactly 4 years later. By then, the war was over. The factories had gone quiet or returned to automotive parts. The airborne divisions had fought across Sicily, France, Holland, Belgium, and Germany. And the M1A1 had already passed the only examination that mattered. Not a patent office review, not a production audit, not a technical inspection. Combat. From Sicily's rocky fields to the bocage of Normandy, from the bridges of Nijmegen to the Rhine at Wesel, the M1A1 had done the job it was built to do. Be ready the moment a paratrooper's boots hit the ground. The M1A1 continued in service long after 1945. Its war did not end when victory was declared in Europe, or when the last transport planes returned home. Instead, like many American weapons of the Second World War, the folding stock carbine found a second life in the conflicts that shaped the second half of the 20th century. Indochina, 1946 to 1954 French paratroopers, facing a brutal colonial war in the jungles, mountains, and river valleys of Indochina, adopted large numbers of American carbines, including the M1A1. Many of these weapons came from U.S. wartime stockpiles or lend-lease returns. In the mud and monsoon rains of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, the M1A1's strengths were once again clear. Light enough for long-range patrols and airborne insertions, short enough to maneuver in dense undergrowth, quick handling in close ambushes, where engagements often occurred at ranges measured in meters, at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, where French airborne and colonial units made their final stand. Photographs and eyewitness accounts confirm that M1 and M1A1 carbines were among the weapons defenders relied on in the trenches and bunkers of the Valley Fortress. For many French paras, the M1A1 represented more than just a rifle. It was a familiar companion from earlier campaigns, a compact tool that adapted well to the unpredictable geometry of jungle warfare. Into the American 1960s Vietnam War. The M1 carbine family continued its journey even further. During the Vietnam War, American Special Operations Forces, including early MACV SOG teams, advisors, and some helicopter crews, used M1 and M2 carbine variants. South Vietnamese regional and paramilitary units also received thousands of carbines through American military assistance programs. In the claustrophobic jungle environment, the same traits that made the M1A1 ideal for airborne troops made it valuable again. Fast into action, easy to carry, less fatiguing during long patrols, well-balanced for close-in engagements in thick brush. Though eventually overshadowed by the M16, the carbine line remained a practical, trusted option in many early war units. A design ahead of its time. The most interesting part of the M1A1's legacy, however, did not come from the rifle itself, but from the ideas it carried into the future. In May 1944, Inland developed a conversion kit that added selective fire capability to the standard M1 carbine. This led directly to the creation of the M2 carbine, capable of both semi-automatic and full automatic fire. For a brief period late in the war, paratroopers had access to the M2A1, a folding stock version combining compact dimensions, immediate ready-to-fire function, and automatic fire capability. It was not perfect. Controllability in full auto was limited, and the .30 carbine round was never designed as a machine pistol cartridge. But the concept was decades ahead of the curve. The M1A1 and its M2 successors pointed unmistakably toward what the modern military now calls PDWS, personal defense weapons, compact carbines, short-barrel automatic weapons for close combat weapons like the XM177E2, the MP5, the FNP90, or even compact M4 variants, all reflect the same philosophy that produced the M1A1. A soldier who moves fast, fights fast. A weapon that is light, compact, and instantly ready wins the first critical seconds of combat. A legacy forged in necessity. The M1A1 began as an emergency solution for paratroopers jumping into the night over Sicily. But its influence rippled outward, across continents, across decades, across wars fought in entirely different landscapes. From the hedgerows of Normandy to the fields of Holland, from the rice paddies of Indochina to the jungles of Vietnam, the ideas embedded in its design lived on. The folding stock was not just a piece of steel. It was a glimpse of what infantry weapons would eventually become: lighter, faster, more adaptable, built for mobility first and power second. And for a rifle conceived in haste, built in a single factory, and rushed to war in barely a year, that legacy is extraordinary. The M1A1 carbine was not the most powerful weapon American paratroopers could carry. It could not match the Garand's range, its punch, or its battlefield authority. On paper, the little folding stock carbine seemed like a compromise, lighter, weaker, almost modest beside the thunder of the .3006. But paper never jumped out of an airplane at night. Paper never spun wildly under a snapped parachute canopy, with the wind tearing at straps and gear, and the ground rising fast. Paper never hit the earth alone, disoriented, bruised, and scattered miles from the intended drop zone while enemy patrols closed in. And that was the reality of airborne combat. Paratroopers did not need a rifle built for long-range duels across open fields. They needed something else, something brutally practical. They needed a weapon that would be there the moment their boots touched the ground. A weapon that did not require assembly in the dark, or fumbling with a canvas case, or searching through equipment that had drifted away in the jump. They needed a weapon that would survive the violence of the fall, the chaos of the landing, and the shock of the first minutes, when a man's life was decided by seconds, not specifications. The M1A1 carbine delivered exactly that. Inland's automotive engineers understood a truth that traditional arms designers sometimes ignored. In real combat, complexity kills. Every hinge, every latch, every tiny extra step is a chance for something to break or for a frightened, exhausted soldier to make a fatal mistake. So they built the M1A1 around a different philosophy, one borrowed from the assembly lines of Detroit. Simplicity is not the enemy of performance. Simplicity is performance. The folding stock, held in place by a spring-loaded cam, required no buttons, no levers, no special technique. It did not ask the paratrooper to think. It simply worked, wet, frozen, covered in mud, or shaking in nervous hands. It worked for the rookie making his first jump. It worked for the veteran who had lived through Sicily and Salerno. It worked under tracer fire. It worked in pitch-black Normandy hedgerows, in fog, in fear, in the confusion of men who had been scattered across miles of enemy territory in the dead of night. That quiet reliability, more than muzzle velocity or ballistic charts, probably saved thousands of lives. Because the best design is not the one that tries to do everything. The best design is the one that does exactly what is needed, exactly when it is needed, every time. Nothing more, nothing less. And in the hands of the airborne troops who dropped into Normandy, Holland, and Bastogne, the humble M1A1 carbine proved that sometimes the simplest tool is the one that brings a soldier home. In the fields of Normandy, fields that should have been quiet pastures, but instead trembled under gunfire and confusion, the M1A1 carbine became something more than a piece of equipment. It became a lifeline. When paratroopers fell through the night sky on D-Day, they did so knowing the risks. Scattered drops, lost bundles, equipment ripped away by wind or tangled in treetops, rifles sealed in cases they might never find again. Many hit the ground alone, miles from the intended drop zone, with only the gear strapped to their bodies and the beating of their own hearts for company. In those terrifying minutes, when German patrols closed in on isolated American soldiers, there was no time to assemble a rifle in the dark. No time to dig through the grass for a weapons bag that had drifted into a marsh. No time to think at all. The M1A1 carbine was simply there, ready the moment a paratrooper stood up from the dirt, ready when a shadow moved through the hedgerows, ready when a man who had trained for years suddenly found himself fighting for his life in the first 10 seconds of combat. That readiness was not an accident. It was a design philosophy. Approximately 140,591 M1A1 carbines were produced during the war. Each one carried the same compact wire folding stock, the same spring-loaded cam that clicked securely into place, the same lightweight, no-nonsense efficiency. There were no unnecessary flourishes, no delicate adjustments, no parts that had to be treated like museum pieces. They were built by automotive engineers, men who understood that, in an emergency, the average person must be able to operate a mechanism correctly, even while terrified, exhausted, or injured. They built the M1A1 with the same mindset used for brakes, clutches, and steering systems. It must work for everyone, every time, under any condition. And the veterans who carried those carbines through Sicily, Normandy, Holland, and Germany never forgot that. Ask them decades later, and you might hear it in their voices, a quiet affection, the kind soldiers reserve only for tools that never betrayed them. The M1A1 wasn't the biggest or the strongest or the loudest. It didn't have the Garand's authority or the Thompson's roar. But when a paratrooper hit the earth alone, dazed and bleeding, and heard the crack of enemy rifles close by, the M1A1 was the weapon that answered. It was the weapon that gave him a fighting chance. A chance to live, a chance to move, a chance to survive long enough to find his unit again. Thousands of American paratroopers came home because Inland's engineers understood a truth that traditional weapons designers had overlooked for generations. In war, the best weapon is not the most powerful. The best weapon is the one that works, every time, without fail, when seconds decide who lives and who dies. That is the legacy of the M1A1 carbine, a folding stock, a simple spring-loaded cam, a design so humble it was easy to overlook, yet powerful enough to save countless lives in the darkest moments of the war. That is the story of the carbine that jumped into Normandy, fought in hedgerows, crossed Europe, and quietly earned the trust of the men who carried it. The story of the little weapon that did exactly what needed to be done, when it mattered most. If you enjoyed this story of American ingenuity and the men who carried these weapons into combat, please subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next video. We have many more stories to tell about the weapons, the soldiers, and the moments that shaped history. Leave a comment below and let us know which World War II topic you'd like us to explore next. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.